Hi, I'm Chris Saclolo. I work at the UCF Libraries Special Collections and University Archives as the book conservator. And today I'm going to be demonstrating the long stitch binding with slotted covers. So in book arts, there's many different types of binding styles. But for this one that I'm going to be demonstrating today, it's a long stitch with slotted covers. And let me just go ahead and switch to the overhead camera again, so you can see exactly what type of binding this is. So this is the binding structure that I'll be demonstrating. It's basically a multi-section binding technique, meaning there are multiple signatures in here, and I'll explain kind of the terminology as we go along. So there's going to be multiple sections right here that are sewn together, and the thread actually goes through the cover. So the attachment of the cover and the pages are found together. So this is a very simple binding structure if you're very new to book art and bookbinding in general. So the materials that I selected for this, they're very basic materials that you can find in your home. So in this case, I used a popcorn box actually, and I've written down in the supplies that you could use a cereal box cover too, and that's perfectly fine. Just as long as it's a thin cardboard type of material that's really flexible. I like the thin ones because it's very easy to use. And as you can see, there are multiple sewing stations. So we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 stations right here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to be folding paper and we're going to punch holes. And the sewing stations here are essentially slotted. So we're going to be taking an X-Acto knife and we're going to be making these slots right here. So the thread actually goes through the cover and into the pages and back and forth. So I'll be demonstrating the technique and how this works. And as you can see here too, on the top right here, there's also the thread actually wraps on the head and tail section of the book too. So that way the book is even more secure. Now this binding technique is originated in medieval Germany. This version of this long stitch is an 18th century version. So it's a very simple binding technique. Beginners are pretty much, this is a really simple binding to do. There's no glue required. So it just basically, you just need the sheets of paper for your pages, and then a cover, and of course the thread. So the thread that I've mentioned in the list of requirements, if you want to participate and follow along, I wrote down bookbinding thread, embroidery thread, and if you're really at the last minute, you could also use floss as well, which is pretty durable. So let me just go ahead and set this down right here. So let me just show off the materials again. So I'm going to be using this type of thread right here. This is a binder thread. And of course, we're going to need a ruler. And I have a pair of scissors, so we're going to need that to trim. And of course, your needle. So I'm using pretty much a big, I believe this is a number 3 or 5. So it's a pretty thick needle. And an optional thing that you can use is this bone folder. And this bone folder is essentially just to fold paper. But you could also use, if you don't have this, that's perfectly fine. Let me just set this down to the autofocus. You could also use a spoon too if you don't have like a bone folder, or you could just use your fingers. And last but not least, you'll just need a pencil just to mark off some areas or mark off where your sewing is going to be. And of course, besides all of the tools, you're going to need the supplies too for this demonstration if you're following along. And that's going to be just regular 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and a cereal box. I'm using just this pancake box because, yeah, pretty much the same material. So that's pretty much all. Oh, and of course the string as well. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to go ahead and start folding paper. So with the 8.5 by 11, I'm going to be just folding short. And so I'm going to go ahead and just fold 12 of these. And so this is what's going to be our pages for our book. Okay. So a folded page like this is called a folio. And so when you have multiple folios, let's say, let me just fold one more. So when you have multiple folios together, let's say these folios are stacked together. So stacked folios become a signature. So that's very important to understand, the signature from a folio. So essentially, we're just going to go ahead and fold the rest of these. So part of bookbinding that I love is folding the paper. Very therapeutic, especially when you're about to begin doing a major kind of binding. So once I have my folded pages, I'm just going to go ahead and smooth this out a bit. We're going to be making the small version of this just so we could accommodate for anybody who not necessarily have like the big cereal box or a smaller piece for a cover. So we're just going to go ahead and trim this down. What we're going to do is, with the folded pages, I'm going to just go ahead and use the scissors. I'm just going to go ahead and carefully cut this in half. I'm just going to do that for all of these, so that way we could have enough pages for our little book. Now that I have the the computer paper in half. I'm just going to go ahead and I'm just going to take 1, 2, 3, 4 sheets. And we're just going to go ahead and create that signature based off of the 4 sheets. So I'm just going to go ahead, fold it. So we're going to make 6 signatures altogether. So again, 1 folio. There's 4 folios in a signature. So we're going to have 6 signatures altogether. All right, so we have our stack of sheets ready to go. And before I get this ready, I'm just going to lightly just press down on this so it's a nice working text block. Let's go ahead and prep our cover. So again, I'm going to be using this pancake mix box. Set this aside. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to disassemble this. So I'm just going to go peel this off here. So I'm going to be using the interior side of this and you could actually use this in your cover. You could just do the opposite end. But for this, I'm going to do here because so that way I could see exactly how the binding goes. Like I don't want it to be so busy with the stuff that's in the front. So I'm going to be doing it in the back so that way you can see exactly how the staggered sewing goes. Okay. So once you have this all, folded out, I'm just going to trim off these little tab areas here. So that way we know we have this nice and square. Okay, so now that it's nice and trimmed a bit, I'm just going to go ahead and going to lay the text block onto just the edge of the box here. And so I'm using the fold exactly where it's at, so I can see exactly where I need to fold over for the top half right here. So once I have this already set, I want to make sure that this is nice. It's the exact height of this without me like pushing down too much. If we want it nice and you don't want it to be too much sticking out. So I'm going to take my pencil and I'm just going to mark off the height right here. Just exactly where the height is. And I'm not really pressing down too much right here. I'm just letting it, trace along. Okay. So I'm going to try to do that too on the opposite side as well of this box. So that way I know to try to even that out. Okay. And let me just switch over to my overhead. Okay. So now that I have that marked off, I'm just going to go ahead and get my straight edge ruler right here. Okay. I'm just going to go ahead and line it up. I have a cutting mat right here, which has a grid. So it does help me a bit when I'm lining up my ruler. Okay? And so once I have that, I'm just going to go ahead and fold this over. So I should have like a little bit of a score line right here. So I'm just trying to make sure that this is the height of the text block itself. I'm just going to fold this really neatly right here. And I'm going to use my bone folder just to smooth that out. Okay. So almost there. So once I have that set, I'm just going to place back the text block just to see how it looks. Let me just switch over to my camera. Okay. So it's kind of like what you should have. Exactly. It should be nicely tucked in there. So that way, that's how we get this nice crisp edge right here for the spine. Okay. And so what we're going to do now is I'm going to trim this off so that way it leaves off just a little bit of mark right there. Okay. So I'm going to switch back to the overhead. Okay. So again, I'm just going to mark off just like right there. Let me just go ahead and move that. So it kind of falls just a little, probably a couple millimeters over the text block. So I'm just going to go ahead and mark that off on opposite ends. So that way I know for sure. I'm just going to take my ruler. I'm just going to go ahead and draw a line. Okay. And so I'm just going to go ahead and trim this off right here. And so I'm just going to, let's see exactly if I need to make any adjustments with it. And don't worry about this other fold. I think it just brings more personality. And this is, it actually gives more character to, or I would say, yeah, more character to the cover. But if that bothers you, you could always try to get to the larger half or get a piece that's larger that doesn't have this. But in this case of this demonstration, it's perfectly fine. And there are other ways you could cover that up too if you're not comfortable with having that fold. But for me, I just like it because it just makes it look more real. And it has it, with the material that we're using too. So, and so what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to go ahead and trace off where I kind of left off right here. And I'm trying to make it as even as possible. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of eyeball that it lines up the same way as the front right here. I'm just going to adjust that a little. And I'm just going to do the same thing too, where I'm marking off on the opposite end. And now it should look pretty decent. Let me switch over to camera here. Okay. It does look like it's a little falling off. Just a little bit, so I'm going to adjust that. See how that looks. Good. Good. Okay. So now we're just going to go ahead and trim this top half right here. And you want it to be flushed with the text block itself. So you want it exactly even for this, because when we're looking at this, we want to make sure that the thread actually wraps around on the top, the head and tail of the book. So that's why we need it exactly to the size of the text block. Okay. Okay. I'm just going to fold this over the opposite side. So that way we have just this nice kind of cardboard texture in the front here. But again, you could always do it this way, depending on how you want to, but there's really no right or wrong. I'm just doing it like this so you could see the sewing itself. Okay. So I think I want to trim it just a little bit more because there's a little bit more, as you can see right there. And I want to make it as flush as possible. And let me just line this up properly right here. Maybe like a hair's more closer. Okay, that looks good. All right, so now what I'm going to do is we're going to start prepping the sewing station. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to take one of the signatures and we're going to create 4 sewing stations and for this binding. So what that is I'm going to open this up right here. And we want to have an even amount of holes. So 1, 2, 3, 4 sewing stations right here. So I have it for like an inch from the top and then an inch here from the bottom here. And then from this mark and this mark, they're about an inch apart. So let me just do that right here. And let me just go ahead and do the overhead right here. So that way you can see this. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and line this up. So 1 inch. Let's do this right here so you can see this much better. 1 inch. So that's 1 inch from the end here. And then we're going to do another 1 inch here. So that's 1 inch from this end. And then we're just going to go ahead and do an inch from the first previous hole, and then an inch right here. Okay. So those are going to be our sewing stations. I'm just going to go ahead and mark that right there. Okay. All right, so I'm going to take the rest of my signatures and I'm going to place the marked signature on the top right here. And so shortcut way to do this is we're going to just take our ruler, make sure everything's nice and even. And we're just going to make that line. Okay. So this is a much faster way to mark off your sewing holes. Okay. So once I have that marked off, we're going to go ahead and punch through these holes. We're going to pre-punch them, so that way it just makes it easier for us to sew. So what I'm going to do is I'm opening it up with the pages. So, and I'm just going to go fold this opposite way. And so with our needle, I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that your signatures are flat on the surface here, so that way it's easier to just slide this hole or the needle into the mark. Okay. And so I'm just going to do that for the rest of these. Okay. So once I have that all punched out, I'm just going to go ahead and fold it back up, just set it in the side right here, and I'm just going to do the for the remainder of the other signatures. So I'm opening it all up here first, and I'm just going ahead and piercing this. And you want to make sure that your needle is just nice and straight and it's going smoothly inside. If you don't want to use a needle, you could also use an awl. And basically an awl is an attached needle onto a handle, which makes it easier to punch holes. But in this case, we're doing this very, very minimally with the amount of tools that we have. All right, should be done with this. Okay. So once I have all my punched holes, I'm just going to go ahead and make sure that the holes are pretty much lined up in a nice straight line. Might have to just double check and see. If not, that should be okay. All right. And so now we're gonna go ahead and prepare the slots in our covers right here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and take one of the signatures, and I'm just gonna mark off exactly where the sewing posts are going to be. All right, you can see. So I'm going to just go ahead and draw that line out. Actually, let me just go ahead and mark off the bottom so that way I know for sure it's a nice even. Just drawing out the line where the slots are going to be on the cover. Okay. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to split these right here. I did not bring my X-Acto knife, so I'm going to just do this with my scissors right here. And if you're doing this with children, make sure that there's parental supervision when handling sharp objects. Okay. I might have to go over it a little bit more, but I have a little. No? All right. Let me do this one more time. Okay. And I'm sure that when I do the staggered, when I go through with the knife, with the needle, it'll be okay. All right. So now we're going to start measuring off some thread. So the amount of thread that we're going to be required for this is we're going to leave off about 3 inches for the tail. I have this nifty cutting mat with the grid here, so I could use that as my guide. But you could also just eyeball it, so just 3 inches here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to measure the height of the signatures there. We're going to do one, okay? And so we're going to do the amount of signatures that we have. So we have a total of 6. We're going to do this 6 times. It doesn't necessarily have to be very even, just as long as you have like this kind of this width right here. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay. And I usually like to give like about 3 more signatures just in case. So 1, 2, and 3. So essentially it is the amount of signatures that you have is how much thread that you'll need plus an additional 3. So I'm just going to go ahead and trim this off once I have that measured out. Okay. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start threading my needle. So I'm just going to go ahead and put this in here, thread it through. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to secure this thread. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm just going to go ahead and just place it down here. And I'm just piercing, I'm giving off like about 1.5 inches or so. And I'm just piercing it through. And I'm just securing this needle. So that way, when I'm sewing, it doesn't fall off. Okay? So this is a really nifty thing to do. All right, so once we have our needle thread, we're going to go ahead and start sewing our book. So we're going to start from the bottom and it's going to work our way to the top. So let's just put this right here. So you want to make sure that you have your cover already set here. Okay, and we're going to start with 1 signature. Okay, we're going to place it on the bottom right here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to open up the signature. Okay, and we're going to go to the very edge of the hole right here. Let me just show that really quick. So we're going to go to this first hole right there. And you want to make sure that you're working on a flat surface too. You want to make sure that your book is always like flat on the table, so that way it doesn't move around. So I'm going to go ahead and push the needle through, and we're going to go through the cover as well. So that's why it's very important to have that slotted station. So I'm just going to go ahead and push through. And I'm going to leave off just about 3 inches or so right here. So now what we're going to do is I'm just going to wrap around. We're wrapping around the edge or the tail end. And we're just going to do a simple double knot. Okay, that's what's going to hold our binding together. Okay. So once we have that tied up, let me just go ahead and tie that up. So once we have it tied up, we're just going to go back into the same hole right here. We're going to come out. And now we're going to go to the next station right here. So we're going to go through. And we're going to try to be careful. We're going to go through the hole right here. So we should be entering back inside the signature. There. And now that we're inside here, we're going to go to the next hole right here, and we're going to exit out. Okay. And so again, we're just going to go to the next. Okay. You want to make sure that it's nice and taut. Make sure that you don't kind of rip the paper altogether, because this is a very just copycat paper for this demonstration, but just make sure that you don't tear through. Okay. And so what we're going to do next, after we're back inside here, we're going to go ahead and wrap this around. Okay, so it should come out like this. So what we're going to do now is we're going to close this right here, and we're going to add the second signature on the top. Okay. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to go through here to the sewing station, and we're going to this edge here of the second signature. Okay. So it should create this one line already, if you could see from the spine right here. Okay, so coming from the second signature, we just entered from the inside here. We're just going to go ahead and wrap right here. We're supposed to wrap around. And then once you have it wrapped around, we're just going to go back into the same hole. It should wrap around the edge of your next signature right here. So just to keep that in mind, so the pattern would be that every time you're in a signature, it should wrap on the edge, on the top and the bottom right here. So that's kind of an indicator if you're doing it right or wrong. So once you have it wrapped on the edge here, we're just going to go ahead and go to this next hole. So I'm just going to go from the outside here, we're just going to enter back in. Okay. And then we're just going to go to the last station right there. Okay. And so once we're out here, we're just going to go ahead and wrap around the inside here again. And we're just going to go ahead and go back into the same hole from the outside here. We're just wrapping around, going inside the same second signature. And we're just going to go through. Okay. So you should have kind of like this pattern. Once you have, you can see the pattern right here. So the pattern, as you go along, you're always going to have the thread wrapping around every single signature. So let me just open this one up. So you have this, so it's 2 here and 2 here. And then the first signature that we had sewn in was 1 here, and in the middle, and then the end right here. There is going to be every alternating kind of pattern. So that's kind of like an indicator to see if you're doing this right. It's just to make sure that you have the thread wrapped around each signature. Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and continue working on this. So I'm going to be placing the next signature on top. And from the outside here, we're just going to go ahead and wrap around. And we're going to wrap around again and go into the first hole. Okay. And so from the outside here, we're going to enter back in, going to the station next. Okay, and so once we're inside here, we're just going to exit out. And then from the outside, we're going to enter back in. And then finally, we're just going to go ahead and wrap around again. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take the next signature, pull this down right here, and I'm going to take the next signature and go ahead and continue working through this book. So it's pretty simple. Again, it's not really that complicated. You just have to make sure that the thread wraps around the head and tail of each of the signatures. And so when you do more signatures, you'll see that the pattern is going to show up more on the spine. I'm going to go ahead again, wrapping around the text or the signature. And then here, I'm just going to go back into the same signature inside the same hole. And I'm just going to go to the station next. And then coming from the outside, and then we're going to enter back in. And then remember that we're going to be on our current signature. And then going to the next. And then again, we're going to wrap around here, and we're just going to go ahead back into the same hole and then come right out. Okay. I have two more signatures to work with. So again, we're just going to open this up, lay the next signature on top, and we're just going to go ahead and wrap around. And we're going to go here to the end of this signature. And then we're just going to go follow our way, same direction. And then we're going to go again to next signature, or next hole right here. And then right back in. And then we're going to wrap around. And then finally, we're going to put the last signature on top. So we're just going to go back in, and we're going to go to the last signature. Wrap it around. Don't have enough string to complete this here, so I'm going to add another. So essentially, since I have just this much left, it's not going to make it all the way around, unfortunately. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do the double knot. And I try to do it, I try to put the knot in between here, from in between the stations or the holes right here. Let me just demonstrate that. So again, very simple, it's just a double knot. Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and trim off the short end one. Make sure that you cut the short end one if you're adding additional thread. So I'm just going to go ahead and re-thread this needle. And then we're going to just go ahead to the next station right here, making sure that everything is nice and neat. Okay. And then to the last hole right here. And then finally, what we're going to do is we're just going to wrap around right here, and we're just going to tie a knot. So what we're going to do is just go underneath this. Okay. And we're just going to do a double knot. Just to tie this off. And this is always the tricky part, to make everything nice and taut. Okay, and then last but not least, just to trim off just a little bit right there. All right, and then I'm going to trim off the tail end from when we started. All right, and that is the long stitch. Should be able to have this kind of cool staggered kind of pattern that's happening right here. And what's interesting about this too is that the binding is exposed, and it's actually also holding the signatures with at the tail and head of the book as well. And it's a really neat bookbinding structure. There are a lot of variations of this, and this one just so happens to be the slotted one, so with the cutouts right here. And what you could do instead of the slots, you could actually pre-make the holes itself. I do have an example of that right here. So in this one here, instead of the slots, there are individual holes. It just takes a lot more measuring for this one right here. As you can see, there's a lot more that you have to measure out. You have to measure out the thickness of each signature, so that way you have this even holes right there. This one in particular, this is much easier to do if you're just beginning, because with the slots, you don't have to worry about the measurement of the placement of the hole, because you're just dealing with the slots itself right here. So this one is essentially it's a good introduction to it. And also you could change, depending on the size of your book too, you could change like how wide and how far apart these slots are, just to make it more interesting too. So I'll give you an example of that, which is this right here. So as you can see, there's a lot of manipulation that you could do with the where you place the holes, and you could create really these cool patterns too. But And this is kind of like, this is kind of the introduction, basically. And you could experiment more. It's a very, I guess it's more, you could do a lot more with this kind of binding and the experiments with. So I think that is pretty much it. So thank you for joining me in making this little small book. If you have any questions, you could always feel free to email me. Whoops. You can email me at, here's my email. Let me just put that over in the chat box. Okay. And if you're interested in other kinds of binding techniques, yeah, just let us know, and we might be able to do other workshops as well via Zoom. So. Okay. Megan, do you want to go ahead and kind of end? Any last minute notes?
Are there any last minute questions for anyone? Sarah asked in the chat if there a name for this kind of binding.
Is there a name? Yes. So this is let me write that down in the chat box. So this is the long stitch with blotted cover. Yeah, so this is just one variation of long stitch, and a simple Google search, if you type in long stitch bookbinding, you'll see different varieties of types of long stitches. And yeah, it's a very versatile binding technique.
Well, thank you everyone for attending. We've got a number of other events scheduled this week for Diversity Week. You can go to our guide, guides.ucf.edu/Diversity Week to see the full slate. Everything is being offered online through Zoom and is free and open to the public. Part of our events like this one will be recorded and added to our website and our Vimeo channel.